The Buddha teaches us that the experience that we have, the phenomena that we perceive, that every portion of the experience that we have is actually based on an erroneous supposition, arises actually from a deluded preconception. And that concept is the concept of self-nature as being inherently real. The Buddha teaches us that since time out of mind, the idea of a solid and very real, very essential self-nature was somehow arrived at, or somehow born, or somehow arose. And of course that's possible because from the sphere of truth, from the primordial wisdom nature, all potency, everything can arise. That idea of self-nature is actually a delusion. That is to say, that idea of self-nature as we understand self-nature to be. And from the moment that that conclusion was arrived at, we began a process of defining and redefining and dividing, sorting out the difference between self and other. Because the odd thing about self is that once you have self, you have to define it constantly. You have to determine where self ends and other begins. Otherwise, there is no self, you see. One has to have that process constantly going on. So since time out of mind, since that first arrival at that first conclusion, we have been constantly defining the separation between self and other, and we do it automatically. We do it without thinking about it. We can't have any experience that we have now without first creating that division. We can't walk, we can't talk, we can't have a thought. We can't have even the most gossamer delicate perception without defining the difference between self, the perceiver, and the perception. That process continues. Not only does it continue, but it exaggerates. In the definition of self-nature as being inherently real, in that continual process, there results from that a clinging. That is to say, that one views self-nature as being a certain way, and once establishing that, there is a natural tendency to maintain that idea, and therefore ego clinging is born. Then one perceives phenomena as being separate from self, and in perceiving phenomena as being separate from self, one must either react toward phenomena with acceptance or rejection or neutrality. But that reaction must occur. You don't have to take my word for it, and you really don't, in this matter, have to take the Buddha's word for it. You can test yourself. You can go, if you're really good at watching your mind, watching the nature of your mind, you can walk out of a room, and then you can walk into the room and open your eyes and watch what happens inside your mind. Everything that you perceive through a process of acceptance or rejection. Every single thing. Or you can close your eyes and have someone walk into a room that you've never seen before and watch what happens. Watch how you see that person. Everything is all about acceptance or rejection. Every single thing. We have no process in our mind that is separate from the things that I've just described, and they are all based on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. Once we have that process, once we are involved in that kind of perceptual process, once we view phenomena in that way, once we have the experience of self-nature, it simply does not do for us to walk around and say, well, the Buddha said it's not true, therefore this isn't happening. You can try that yourself. All you have to do is walk out into the street and see if cars are not happening. Because you will absolutely find out that cars are happening. Or I have somewhere a pin on my garment, and if you don't believe that you're experiencing phenomena right now, if you don't believe that what you see is real, it'll take me about 5 minutes to convince you that this is real. So you can't say, some people think that that is the correct way to proceed, but you cannot deny the reality of your experience. You cannot deny the reality of your experience of self, and you cannot deny the reality of your experience of other. What we are existing in now is a view that is based on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, and it's a view of relativity. Everything that we perceive is relative to self. Now, according to the Buddha, all sentient beings are suffering, or are experiencing suffering in some way. Of course, it's obvious that some of us are experiencing it to a greater degree, and some of us are experiencing it to a lesser degree. That's blatantly obvious. There are people that are starving, there are people that are dying, there are people that are sick, there are people that are so old that their functions are reduced, their function is reduced. And there are other people that are very young, very strong, very vital, very wealthy, very beautiful. And they own boats and coffee percolators and color TVs and things that other people don't own. And there are people that have the knack or the skill to convince themselves that they're really happy, no matter what. And some people that can have everything that they've ever asked for and never know a moment's happiness or peace. The myriad of human experience is inconceivable. It's inconceivable how diverse experience is. But the Buddha said that to some degree all sentient beings have a common experience, and that experience is one of suffering, and that according to the kind of consciousness you have, and according to the realm of cyclic existence you are involved in, you have a certain kind of suffering that fits in with that. For instance, animals experience the suffering of ignorance. They become victimized by those that are smarter than them, and even by one another. A lion, for instance, would hunt for a rabbit. And you might say that the rabbit gets caught and gets killed because it isn't as fast as the lion or as powerful. But there are other forms of life that are small and slow that lions can't kill, and it's because they have defenses. Basically, the little rabbit dies because it's too ignorant or too dumb to be able to figure out a way to shake the lion. It doesn't dig into the ground. It doesn't dive into the water. There are things that it just doesn't think of. And in the same way, cows and chickens and pigs are victimized by human beings. They're domesticated and they're kept and slaughtered and used for their food. And that's happened because they're too ignorant to be able to figure out a way out of their suffering. A cow is much stronger than a man, you know. A cow could get away if it really tried, if it really could think of how to do it. So animals have that suffering of stupidity, dullness, or ignorance. Human beings have the suffering of old age, sickness, and death. Even the one with the coffee percolator is getting old. We'll be sick from time to time, and eventually we'll die. And sometimes it may be the one who's had everything that is the most appalled at the idea of losing his or her life. Perhaps more so than the one who never valued their life too much. It all works out somehow, and what it works out to be is that the Buddha was right. Sentient beings do suffer. But the Buddha taught an extraordinary teaching that really has to be examined in every way possible. And it's an unusual teaching. The Buddha taught us that there is an end to suffering. It's hard for us to conceive of an end of suffering. How can that be? But the Buddha taught us that there is a cessation of suffering. And the way that he taught us that was by explaining the cause of suffering. I've described to you that since time out of mind, we've had this idea of self-nature as being inherently real, that we have divided the difference between self and other, and that we are constantly having this perceptual process that is involved with that kind of routine. And I've described that there is an exaggeration of that perceptual process, and that that exaggeration is clinging, ego clinging, clinging to self-nature as being a certain way, and to clinging to the stability of self-nature, and also clinging to other things by acting with attraction, repulsion, or neutrality toward other things, having feeling or clinging toward other things. The Buddha teaches us that that clinging actually is the cause for all suffering. Yet it actually isn't the idea of self-nature being inherently real, that having that idea is not the cause of suffering, that it is desire that is the cause of suffering. That's really interesting, because it goes to show that denying that things exist, denying that you exist, and some people like to do that and feel that that's a very spiritual thing to do. Denying things may not be the answer if what the Buddha says is right. It is desire that causes suffering. And so purifying one's mind in a certain way in order to pacify desire, which we all have, according to the Buddha, that can bring about the cessation of suffering. The Buddha calls the cessation of suffering enlightenment. Enlightenment actually occurs when clinging, when desire, when hatred, greed, and ignorance are pacified to the degree that one can experience spaciousness, and therefore experiencing spaciousness, one can naturally and spontaneously abide within the awareness of one's own true primordial nature. And that nature is the very nature of enlightenment itself. Now, what we have to do is we have to hear that whole bit of reasoning, that whole thought process that I just laid out, and we have to think about it in a very real, solid, and logical way. We can't just practice a practice or hear a teaching and go through the movement of spirituality without thinking through these cause and effect relationships, without thinking through the idea of what method really is, without thinking through the idea of what the cause of suffering really is and what the cessation of suffering really is. We have to think this through. We have to get the big picture. Why do we have to get the big picture? Because if we don't, we will not be true to ourselves. We will have no spiritual fidelity. We will be going through the motions. We'll be faking it. The stark reality of that, and it's a painful one to look at, and perhaps a shocking one, is that we will be like spiritual whores if we don't get this picture. Forgive me for using a shocking word. But one must understand to the depths of one's heart so that one can be true to oneself. Otherwise, it is entirely possible, and I see it happening again and again and again, that people can do practices. Oh, you can practice for 8 hours a day. And you can talk the talk and walk the walk and wear the clothes and do all the kinds of things that practitioners do, that spiritual people do, and you can look ever skyward and look very humble and look all kinds of different ways. And yet, in your mind, you're filled with desire. You're on fire with desire. You're all churned up, unable to be true to yourself, thinking that it only matters how you act and not what is in the heart. I've seen it again and again and again that meditators will look ever so holy. They'll sit there and they've got even the right, let's say they got these fingers, or sometimes these fingers, and they do all these funny little things, and they sit in the right position, and whenever you talk to them, they're so peaceful. You see a lot of this kind of thing. And in their mind, they are desperate for your approval. That's why they're acting like that. They are filled with passion. They are aflame with a kind of experience that perpetuates their suffering. They're not true to themselves because they don't understand that the cause of suffering is desire, and that they alone are responsible, really responsible, for rooting it out of their hearts. That going through the motions won't do it. It won't cut it. That only being real with what you have inside your mind and inside your heart will even come close. There is a kind of spiritual fidelity that we have to strive for. And we can only do it through reason and logic, actually. We have to think this through. I've seen people try to do it without reason and logic. I've seen people come to the center, oh, we have the big crystals, and we have this altar, we have all these Buddhas, we have a stoop out there, we have somebody with a piece of paper on the wall that says she's kind of something or else, and all these people with robes, and everybody comes here, and it's all open all the time, 24 hours a day, and they serve us coffee, and isn't that wonderful? And so we just have a meaningful experience when we come here. If nothing else, the crystals will get you. So we have this meaningful experience. People come in and they're just like, oh yes, I'm having this blissful experience, and it's just so meaningful. And what are they doing? What are you doing? What can you be thinking when you do something like that? What's happening in your mind? Going from one passion to another, going from one meaningful experience to another. What are you doing to practice? Inside, the mind is inflamed. You're busy looking somehow, looking a certain way. I see this again and again and again. We're trying to have an emotional experience. And that emotional experience is somehow supposed to be better than the other emotional experiences that we have. Have any of you ever had emotional experience? About anything? You know what did you notice about emotional experiences? The first thing, Can't hear you. Comes and goes, you're right. The best thing about emotional experiences is that some of them, when they're there, can be nice. But the real thing about emotional experiences is that they are as impermanent as the wind. Have you ever tried to duplicate an emotional experience? Once you've had one and you remember what it's like? Have you ever sat around for days and days being depressed because you can't find it anymore? Why would you want to do that? You have to think this through, you see. You have to approach this with some kind of logic and reason. An emotional experience is an emotional experience. If you have one because of a temple, or if you have one because of something spiritual, or if you have one because of a crystal, or even if you have one because of a guru, what makes it different from any other emotional experience? It's the same. It's exactly the same. It's impermanent. And I know people that really suffer on their path because they saw their guru the first time and they had this incredible, passionate experience. It's like amazingly emotional, and they were blown away. And it stopped there. They didn't really get into the meat of their practice. They tried to rely on that one thing to last them for the rest of their lives. And it can't. You have to have logic and reason. You have to think through what the path is all about. It has to be real, and you have to be real with your mind. And so they have that one experience, and for the rest of the time, they just walk around really trying to duplicate it. Just trying to duplicate it, thinking that that's it. When you can duplicate it, that's what it is. Crushed, because it never quite happens again the same way. When you meet a teacher and the teacher really teaches you a valid path, that first experience is only a hook. It's the hook of compassion. It's what we call it in Buddhism. It's the hook of compassion, and it's only supposed to do that. Just reel you in. The rest of it's up to you. You and you alone. You are responsible. You are responsible for spiritual fidelity. How does one achieve spiritual fidelity? First of all, you must understand what the point is, what the goal is. The goal in practicing is not to be a practitioner. The goal in meditating is not to be a meditator. The goal in practicing some spiritual practice is not to be spiritual. Did you know that? Why would you want to be spiritual? You could be spiritual, or you could be not spiritual, or you could be pretty, or you could be ugly, or you could be young, or you could be old, or you could have freckles, or not. But you would still be involved in the process and the desire that causes suffering. You have to be true to your own mind, to that nature inside of you that is indescribable and already complete. That nature that is the same nature as Guru Rinpoche, the same nature that is the Buddha, that has no beginning and is spontaneously completed, that has no substance and yet is the mother of all experience. That nature that is pure luminosity and spaciousness itself. That is the true Guru. And the only way to experience, to reside spontaneously within the experience of that nature, is to rid oneself of hatred, greed, and ignorance. To rid oneself of the mother of all these three, which is desire. And you can't hire a mechanic to do that. You can't get someone to come in there and steam clean your brain. You have to do it yourself. You have to do it yourself by being true to yourself, by looking in your mind, by following cause and effect relationships, by following the method, by understanding what the problem is and what the result should be, and accomplishing the method that will bring about that result truly and completely. Only you can do that. No one else can do that. You are completely responsible for the result. In our tradition, it is said that the Buddha is like the doctor, that the path is like the medicine, and that the Sangha is like the nurse. And that the Lama, in a sense, is representative of all those three because it gives the teaching of the Buddha. The Lama is the teacher. It gives the teaching of the Buddha. It provides the wisdom of the Buddha and administers the teaching in such a way that one can really take it. So you have to identify this sickness. You have to identify what you can use to get well. But you can have doctor, medicine, and nurse and never take the medicine. We've all done that. We've all had opportunities that we've missed completely. So we have to develop the ability to be spiritually true to ourselves. That takes time, and it takes more effort than you've ever put into anything. There's nothing that you can do that's more difficult than that. It takes a constant and consistent effort. It isn't something that you do when you first get onto the path and once you're onto it, you're home free. You have to do that. You have to develop that spiritual fidelity every waking moment and sleeping moment. Every moment of your life, and it never stops until we reach supreme enlightenment and are completely pure and residing naturally and effortlessly perched within the sphere of pure cognition. Until we have that, we should practice accordingly. So I hope that you will take into account this short teaching on spiritual fidelity. It's something that I try to teach again and again and again in many different ways because I think it's hard to hear. It's really hard to hear, and it's especially hard to practice. Even if you hear it very well right now and go, yeah, I know what she's saying. I really understand what she's saying. What's going to happen when you walk outside? That we can't help it, but that wanting approval, that wanting to be a certain way, that clinging to ourselves as being a certain way, that constant reactive mode, the attraction and repulsion that we feel for things that we see, it all starts to kick in again, and we find ourselves just treading water. When that happens, you should do two things. You should give yourself a break, do the best you can, and don't let yourself get away with murder. 3 cardinal rules. The Buddha didn't teach these, actually. That was my idea. I like to let you know where things come from. But those are my 3 cardinal rules, and I feel like if we do that and do it diligently, carefully, we'll find something extraordinary and we'll be able to make progress. Not in a week, not in 2 weeks, not in months or even years. It takes a while. It takes a while. But it's possible because the Buddha said so. And he would know he crossed the ocean of suffering. So thank you very much for coming to listen to this teaching. And I always tell people at the end of teaching, you're probably tired of hearing this by now, but I feel that it's my duty to tell you that if you've come here because this is a great place to be and you like the lunch, that's fine. And if you come here because it's entertaining to be here, that's also fine. I know I can be a little entertaining at times. But what you'll take away with you will be very limited. Really, you'll have come and basically watched a movie. And you can pay $6 and watch a more entertaining movie than this. The only way that anything that you've heard today is going to benefit you is if you take it to heart and really use it. Use it every day as much as possible. And if you fall off the horse, get right back on it again. You can do that. That's allowed. So please use what you've learned and make it part of your life, whatever your life is about.
Sage unto